Good morning, and welcome to the worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. My name is Arthur Kuhl, today's worship associate. We hope that here you will find a message that inspires you, a message that transforms you, and a loving and caring community that gives meaning to your life. I have a few announcements this morning. There's a special announcement from the Religious Education and Exploration from Elizabeth Colliardi. There will be today at 11 a.m. a Zoom for the children. So Elizabeth asks you to register by emailing her at dree@idahofallsuu.org. dree@idahofallsuu.org. You will then receive a link so you can tie into the program. The program will be about natural light phenomena, including the physics and mythology of lightning, will-o'-wisps, and St. Elmo's fire. The second announcement from Elizabeth is that there will be upcoming children's programs and activities throughout September. So look for the updates and keep in mind especially September 18th, 19th, and 20th. And third, Elizabeth Colliardi would also like a volunteer, a youth advisor, to help Cindy Logan for the youth Zoom twice a month before the worship services. So please contact Elizabeth Colliardi for that. I also would like to remind you that the women's group meeting will be September 4th, this coming Friday at 5:30. And it will be an event that is socially distanced and masked at a new venue, Kate Curley Park. So bring your chair, food, and drink to the northwest corner at Emerson and 9th Street. And on September 11th, the men's group will be meeting at Jim David's home. Most of you will have received an email to that effect. Now, please note that if you have joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones that have affected your life in the recent past, and that you would like to share with the congregation, please open the chat box and post them in the space provided. Thank you. We also now encourage you to make an offering to support this church. A religious community is like a river formed from the many streams of our lives that meet and merge and flow to the sea. As members and friends of this religious community, we share our time and energy, our creativity, imagination, our vision, our talents, our skills and gifts, and the streams of our individual lives to create a river that is both deep and broad. A river that is made of many streams, sustains life, and refreshes the land through which it flows. But the river of this community also depends on our shared financial support that makes real our shared values and vision. You can make a contribution by mailing a check to the church at the P.O. Box 50376 in Idaho Falls, Idaho 83405. Again, this is P.O. Box 50376 in Idaho Falls, zip code 83405. Or you can do it by going to the church's website at idahofallsuu.org and click on Donate in the Connection menu. What is given in love is received with deep gratitude and love. May this congregation be worthy of all your gifts. Thank you, and blessed be. Now let us enter into the spirit of worship with these thoughts. It has been said for thousands of years that our breath is the gateway to the peace of stillness and the insights of the soul. I will now ring the peace bowl 3 times, and for as long as you can hear its sound, I invite you to slowly breathe in, and then slowly breathe out, and let peace come to you and be with you.
John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. But his soul goes marching on. The stars above in heaven are looking kindly down. The stars above in heaven are looking kindly down. The stars above in heaven are looking kindly down on the grave of old John Brown. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. He captured Harper's Ferry with his 19 men so true. He frightened old Virginia till she trembled through and through. They hanged him for a traitor, they themselves the traitor crew. His soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. Well, he's gone to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. He's gone to be a soldier in the army of the Lord. He's gone to be a soldier in the army of the Lord, but his soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath is stored. He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on.
Please join me now in reading the Church's covenant, which is printed in the order of service. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Rev Kevin will now light our chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism, to illumine these thoughts. Blessed is the fire that burns deep in the soul. It is the flame of the human spirit, touched into being by the mystery of life. It is the fire of reason, the fire of compassion, the fire of community, the fire of justice, the fire of faith. It is the fire of love burning deep in the human heart, the divine glow in every life.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is the poem I Too by the Harlem Renaissance poet Langston Hughes. I too sing, America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and I eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I, too, am America. I invite you to join in our opening hymn, number 1, May Nothing Evil Cross This Door.
Today's Time for All Ages is One Flower in a Field, adapted from One Flower in a Field by Joshua Searle White in Magic Wanda's Travel Emporium, Tales of Love, Hate, and Things in Between. Starring Willow the Bunny, narrated by Elizabeth. Once upon a time there was a field. It had dry grass, brambles and thistles, and high places and low places, and rocks scattered around, and a stream that passed alongside. And scattered around, here, there, and everywhere, were flowers. All kinds of bright, beautiful flowers growing up out of the dry grass. Roses and gladiolus and mint and daisies and all kinds of flowers. Now, you may ask, how could these flowers grow when the field was so dry? The answer is that next to each flower was a hole in the ground, and in each hole lived an animal whose job was to tend that flower. Most were rabbits, but there were chipmunks and squirrels and mice, and even a bear or two. Every morning, each animal would come out of its hole, hop or scurry down to the stream, and use a leaf to scoop up some water. Then they would each carry their leaf back and water their flower. In a little gully in this field, next to a tall rose, lived a rabbit. Every day she would go down to the stream and get some water for her rose. She loved that flower. It was tall and bright, strong and healthy, and she took very good care of it. One afternoon, the rabbit decided to hop to the top of a little hill alongside her gully. When she got to the top, she saw something she had never seen before. Down a ways, she saw a flower. It might have been a daisy, but it was hard to tell. This flower looked in bad shape. Now, why had she never seen that flower before? It's not that big a mystery. She had never climbed that particular little hill to look in that direction. Of course she knew that the field was full of flowers. She may have heard some were not doing quite as well as her rose, but she'd never actually seen one that looked as bad as this. She hopped down the hill to take a closer look, and then she began to understand. This flower needed water. Its stem was bent. Its petals were wilting in the heat. The ground around it was parched and dry. The rabbit felt bad that a flower could be so neglected. And then she did nothing. Even though the flower looked terrible, it was just one flower in a field after all. The field had plenty of other flowers that were doing fine. The rabbit had enough work to do, watering her own flower, so she went home and got on with her business, getting up every morning, going to the stream, watering her rose, and hopping around all afternoon. But the other flower didn't go away. At least once a day, the rabbit couldn't help but hop up to the top of the hill and take a quick look. Every day, the other flower looked a little worse. It started to get to her. The rabbit thought about that flower at night while she was trying to sleep. She thought about it in the morning when she hopped to the stream for water. She couldn't even enjoy her own flower so much, knowing the other flower was wilting more and more every day. Now, you may wonder, why didn't that rabbit just go over and water the flower? After all, it was not far away, just on the other side of the hill. The stream had plenty of water, and the rabbit had plenty of time. Well, that's a good question. The rabbit thought about it all the time. She'd think about making an extra trip to the stream to get some water for that flower. But then she'd think, well, you don't just march into someone's front yard and water their flower without asking, do you? What if that flower is someone else's to water? They might yell at me or something. Or she'd think, what if the flower likes being dried up and droopy? That's possible, isn't it? Or she'd think, aren't there animals who are supposed to go around and help out flowers whose animals don't water them? I should leave it to them, right? With all these questions swirling in her head, the rabbit went about her business, taking care of her rose every day and trying not to think about the other flower. But it kept bothering her, especially at night. It was kind of irritating, actually. Sometimes she wished the flower would get better by itself or die, but every time she sneaked a peek, there it was, looking more dry, more wilted, and more droopy. Finally, the rabbit could stand it no longer. One morning, hopping from the stream with a leaf full of water for her rose, she suddenly thought, it's just not right. Flowers are not supposed to wilt like that. Flowers should be healthy and colorful and bright and beautiful. And she found herself hopping over the hill toward the other flower, taking the water over there instead. At the top of the hill, the rabbit got a bit nervous. Her nose twitched as she sniffed the air. It might be dangerous over there. She shouldn't be watering other animals' flowers. But then she said, it's just not right, and kept going over the hill and down the other side. The rabbit hopped closer to the dry flower, closer than she had been before. Suddenly, a bear cub popped out of a hole in the ground. The bear cub yelled, "Hey, what are you doing?" "I'm going to water this flower," the rabbit said. "It's too dry, and if I don't water it, it will die." The bear cub said, "What business is it of yours whether this flower dies? This is my flower. I'll take care of it how I want. Go home and take care of your own flower." But the rabbit answered, "I'm sorry, but I tried that. Flowers are supposed to be bright and beautiful, not wilting and droopy. So I'm going to water this flower." She watered that dry, wilted, drooping daisy right in front of the bear cub, though he fussed and mumbled and gave her mean looks. And she turned around and hopped back over the hill. The next day she came back with a leaf full of water and watered it again. And the day after that she watered it again. And then another day, and another, and another. The bear cub continued to fuss and mumble and give the rabbit mean looks, but the flower started to look better. First the petal perked up, then the stem began to stand up a little straighter, then its leaves started to fill out and get bigger. The flower even grew a little taller. And the rabbit felt good about herself and the flower she had helped. The end. Starring Willow the Bunny, with guest appearances by Chipmunk, Bluebird, Squirrel, Bear, Bison, and Moose. Shot on location in Idaho Falls.
We now dedicate time to our joys, concerns, sorrows, and milestones, a time to share with this religious community events that have affected your life in the recent past, and to speak out for those you want to hold in our thoughts. Daniel Schwen will read your joys and concerns, while Rev Kevin Carson will light the candle for you. For those of you online, you can see these joys and concerns in the chat box on the right side of the screen. And please remember that you can still add your joys or concerns right now.
Okay, so I've got a joy from Lisa Christensen. My joy is that we adopted 2 dogs from the shelter. Jolene is a 1.5-year-old mountain cur, and Winnie is a 6-month-old min pin lamb. They are a lot of fun. Next I have a sorrow from Bill and Cindy Miller. Our sweet friend Lucy Huffman passed away on Thursday from colon cancer. She will be so missed. And then I've got a joy from both Andrew White and Rob Logan, Rob's joy is that Cindy and his anniversary of 41 years of marriage just came up. It just keeps getting better. And I think that's it in the chat. So by now, it's too late. Okay, back to you.
We light a last candle to lift up these joys and concerns, as well as the ones that remain in the silence of our hearts.
Our reading this morning is an excerpt from A Plea for Captain John Brown by Henry David Thoreau, read to the citizens of Concord, Massachusetts on Sunday evening, October 30th, 1859. For some historical context, John Brown and 18 followers raided the U.S. Army Arsenal in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia on October 16th, 1859, in hopes of securing weapons to foment a slave rebellion in the South. After clashing with federal soldiers under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee, Brown was captured on October 18th, and soon after, he was tried for treason. Many abolitionists, such as Thoreau, spoke out for Brown, but he was hanged on December 2nd. This event foreshadowed and possibly even helped precipitate the American Civil War a year and a half later. Thoreau writes, "Who is it whose safety requires that Captain Brown be hung? Is it indispensable to any northern man? Is there no resource but to cast this man also to the Minotaur? If you do not wish it, say so distinctly. While these things are being done, beauty stands veiled and music is a screeching lie. Think of him, of his rare qualities, such a man as it takes ages to make and ages to understand. No mock hero, nor the representative of any party, a man such as the sun may not rise upon again in this benighted land, to whose making went the costliest material, the finest adamant, sent to be the redeemer of those in captivity, and the only use to which you can put him is to hang him on the end of a rope. You who pretend to care for Christ crucified, consider what you are about to do to him who offered himself to be the Savior of 4 millions of men. Any man knows when he is justified, and all the wits in the world cannot enlighten him on that point. The murderer always knows that he is justly punished. But when a government takes the life of a man without the consent of his conscience, it is an audacious government, and it is taking a step toward its own dissolution. Is it not possible that an individual may be right and a government wrong? Are laws to be enforced simply because they were made, or declared by any number of men to be good if they are not good? I see now that it was necessary that the bravest and humanest man in all the country be hung. Perhaps he saw it himself. I almost fear that I may yet hear of his deliverance, doubting if a prolonged life, if any life, can do as much good as his death. Misguided, garrulous, insane, vindictive, so ye write in your easy chairs. And thus he, wounded, responds from the floor of the armory, clear as a cloudless sky, true as the voice of nature is. No man sent me here. It was my own prompting and that of my Maker. I acknowledge no master in human form. I foresee the time when the painter will paint that scene. No longer going to Rome for a subject, the poet will sing it, the historian record it. And with the landing of the Pilgrims and the Declaration of Independence, it will be the ornament of some future national gallery, when at least the present form of slavery shall be no more here. We shall then be at liberty to weep for Captain Brown. Then, and not till then, we will take our revenge. I invite you to join in our second hymn, number 168, One More Step. A few weeks before we moved to Idaho, Marty and I decided to take a short vacation for a few days in the Adirondacks. Over the years we have lived in New England, the Adirondack Park has become one of our favorite places. And at over 9,300 square miles, roughly 3 times the size of Yellowstone, it is one of the largest areas of wilderness and mixed-use land in the United States. It is a beautiful region of mountains, lakes, and rivers that has been known as a place for outdoor recreation since the late 1800s. It is home to the great camps built by America's Gilded Age millionaires in the rustic, woodsy architectural style that would inspire the Grand Lodges in Yellowstone and other national parks. Most of our trips to the Adirondacks have been camping trips, but this time we stayed in a hotel in the town of Lake Placid, which is best known for hosting the 1932 and 1980 Winter Olympics, including the famous Miracle on Ice gold medal performance by the U.S. men's hockey team. And as we've often done on visits to the Lake Placid region, one morning we drove just outside of town to the community of North Elba, to a park on a prominent ridge, which is a glacial esker left over from the last ice age. Looming atop the mostly forested hill are the imposing ski jumps built for the 1980 Olympics. And nearby is what we were there to see, the historic farmstead of John Brown. It was here that John Brown lived in 1859 when he launched his famous raid on the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry. And after his execution, he was laid to rest near his small farmhouse on December 8th. The spot where he lies a-mouldering, as the song goes, rests in a fenced-in area beside a large boulder inscribed with his name. And close by is a statue of Brown leading a young black boy to freedom. Even before the war began, John Brown's gravesite quickly became a shrine for the abolitionist cause. As I sat near his grave on that Sunday morning in June, it was clear that 161 years later, it was still a shrine. Surrounding his grave were dozens of small signs stuck in the ground in support of Black Lives Matter, and bouquets of flowers left in his memory. Slavery may have officially ended after the Civil War, but despite a bloody war that cost over 600,000 American lives, and despite great progress over the last century in advancing civil rights, the Black Lives Matter sign reminds us that systemic racism and oppression are still very much with us. America has yet to fully come to terms with the terrible legacy of slavery. Lately, it seems that hardly a week goes by without another black life taken by police or another blatant attempt at voter suppression. And it is almost certain that the public discourse that follows every travesty will evoke racist remarks from some of our so-called leaders and public figures. The legal institution of slavery was an easy target for those who fought against the oppression of other people based on the color of their skin. But then as now, race-based issues of social justice were often complicated by fear and white privilege. Many whites who supported the abolition of slavery, for example, favored the return of blacks to Africa. They could not imagine an America populated by freed slaves living alongside their white neighbors. Others worried that the abolitionists were too hasty in their demands for an immediate end to slavery, that the sudden end to slavery would create too much social and economic havoc. Better that slavery be ended in a more gradual, phased approach of some sort for the good of the nation. It would be nice to think that our Unitarian and Universalist ancestors of that period were solidly on the right side of history. But alas, they too were for the most part just as prejudiced as everyone else. Certainly there was greater support for abolition in the North, especially among the leading intellectuals. But many of the historical figures we now celebrate in our tradition were cautious about taking too strong a stand against slavery. Some ministers, like the famous Reverend Theodore Parker, paid a high professional price and faced real risk when they did. Though he was a hugely popular preacher in the Boston area, Parker's well-known abolitionist views were considered too radical for most of the Unitarian establishment. The congregational polity that governs our denomination does not provide a means to defrock or excommunicate troublesome ministers per se, but the American Unitarian Association and many of Parker's colleagues tried to make his life miserable by whatever petty means they could. For a few ministers like Parker, their abolitionist involvement went far deeper than words or public witness. Parker, along with fellow Unitarian minister Thomas Wentworth Higginson, were part of the so-called Secret Six influential men who directly supported John Brown's cause materially. They could easily have been convicted of treason and even hanged if exposed. Parker likely avoided any repercussions only because he was already abroad in Italy when Brown raided the arsenal, already suffering from the tuberculosis which claimed his life in 1860. But despite the risk, I am not surprised that some Unitarian and Universalist clergy were willing to take a public stand against slavery. What I find far more remarkable is their support for someone like John Brown. Sure, Brown was seen as someone who was fed up with all the debate and willing to take decisive action. But consider the fact that he was a known murderer and religious fanatic. His exploits with an abolitionist militia in the Bleeding Kansas crisis in 1856, including the infamous Potawatomi massacre of 5 pro-slavery settlers, were nationally known. Think about the praise heaped on him in Thoreau's plea that I read this morning. And by the way, that was only a brief example of the whole speech. That was more than 8,500 words in length. Thoreau literally wrote the essay, Civil Disobedience, that became the inspiration for the nonviolent movements of Gandhi and Dr. King. And here we find him suggesting Brown was some messianic figure in the lineage of Jesus Christ, offering himself to be the savior of 4 millions of men. Brown would doubtlessly be pleased by such a comparison, since he saw himself as God's righteous weapon in the fight against slavery. And if there's any doubt about John Brown's violent intentions for America, his own words are rather blunt. I, John Brown, am quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away, but with blood. Like so many historical figures, John Brown was a complicated and extremely controversial character. If you're around today, lending his prophetic zeal to Black Lives Matter or some other cause, I suspect that most of us, like most of his contemporaries, would likely think he was a raving lunatic. If you have ever seen a portrait of the man with his crazy prophet hair and piercing eyes, he looks like the perfect fit for the kind of person we might imagine as some messianic prophet convinced of the righteousness of his cause, no matter the human cost. Such people seem to inspire others to follow them sometimes, and it would seem that even some liberal Unitarian clergy are not immune from their thrall. Abolitionists were rightfully fed up with the status quo and the government's failure to act against the obvious moral evil of slavery. But the temptation to resort to violence is a cautionary tale that rarely ends well. Perhaps the bloodshed of the Civil War was necessary to end slavery, but even the tragic loss of so many lives did not end the inequality and systemic racism that still plagues our nation. If we are ever tempted to justify violence in the wake of yet another Black life lost, I think we would do well to remember this. Brown and his supporters were convinced that war was inevitable and that giving weapons and encouragement to those in bondage would be certain to rise up against their masters and exact justice, gaining their freedom along the way. It was a futile plan, and it drastically underestimated the power of centuries of institutionalized oppression and the complex logistics required to pull off such a scheme. As Thoreau foretold, Brown was far more effective as a martyr and a symbol than as a militant leader of a slave rebellion. And even today, the Black Lives Matter signs at his grave venerate the man more for his convictions than the deeds he accomplished. For abolitionists who saw the Civil War as a means to end slavery more than an attempt to preserve the Union, John Brown's body became an inspirational tune. Not long after the war began, in November 1861, When the Boston Unitarian Julia Ward Howe and her minister, Reverend James Freeman Clark, were in Washington, D.C., they heard Union troops singing the song, and Clark suggested that Howe should write some, quote, better words. She soon became famous for her battle hymn of the Republic, one more addition to John Brown's complicated legacy. Over the last several months, it has been heartening to see thousands of people in America and around the world marching against racism and police brutality, though it has also been heartbreaking to see the tragic incidents that prompted such moral outrage continue to occur with alarming frequency. The list of names such as George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and now Jacob Blake is growing longer every week. And these tragic confrontations are happening in cities from coast to coast. 2 days ago, thousands of Black Americans and their allies marched on Washington once again, despite the ongoing pandemic, to mark the 57th anniversary of Dr. King's famous gathering at the Lincoln Memorial. Were it not for the pandemic, I'm sure the crowd this year would have been enormous. People are simply fed up. 57 years after Dr. King articulated his vision for a diverse, inclusive, and just America, we shouldn't have to keep marching for the same basic human rights for all Americans. We shouldn't be fighting the same blatant attempts to disenfranchise people of color in order to cheat the electoral process. For 400 years, America has treated Black lives as if they did not matter. And even though polls show overwhelming support for change, some elected leaders who claim to represent all the people refuse to even say that Black lives matter. Race has been politicized more than it has been in decades. White supremacists who have been lurking in the shadows are finding a seat at the table. And right-wing rhetoric from some politicians is practically goading them to violence, like the shootings we saw in Kenosha this week. We are a divided nation, and you often hear that we are more divided than at any time since the years just before the Civil War. I think that is only partially correct, since unlike those days, we are not divided geographically or by slave state versus free state. Today, there are good people and very misguided and dangerous people scattered throughout every state. But in my heart, I believe the good people far exceed the others. Some people will never share a vision of a diverse America, but many others simply need more open dialogue and engagement to come around. As someone who grew up in the South, surrounded by Confederate memorials and steeped in the history of the Civil War, I can even appreciate some of the anger and pushback the removal of Confederate memorials is generating. There needs to be more dialogue, but that doesn't mean we should be more complacent in the face of violence. The late civil rights giant John Lewis famously called on us to get into good trouble in our efforts to bring about change, advocating the nonviolence of his mentor, Dr. King. As a predominantly white denomination, Unitarian Universalists can be great allies for Black Americans, and we have a long history of doing just that. True, we have our own internal shortcomings with Black UUs that we still need to confront. But we have at least acknowledged our historical failures and started down the path. Now more than ever, we need to engage in good trouble. These times call for taking to the streets whenever we can to support the demands for police reform and to state unequivocally that Black lives matter. I would never advocate for the violent tactics of Captain John Brown, but I believe the lesson we can learn from his example is the need to put our bodies into the fight as much as our words. As the saying goes, we need to have some skin in the game. People showing up in visible demonstrations across America are starting to make a difference in what seems to be a genuine watershed moment in the making. But it is not without risks. Some agitators have resorted to violence that cannot be condoned, but tear gas and rubber bullets have greeted even peaceful protesters under the pretext of restoring law and order. I'm heartened to see so many of our fellow UUs involved. With the pandemic, I would urge extreme caution with respect to large crowds, but as things improve, we need to keep showing up. In the meantime, we must remain vigilant and do what we can. Good people are on the move. Even a small tourist town like Lake Placid, the day before we visited, before we visited John Brown's grave, we ran into a Black Lives Matter march that took over Main Street with several hundred marchers. This in a town with no college or even a significant year-round population. I don't know who organized the march, but then from the number of young people participating, I suspect many were Olympic hopefuls who come to Lake Placid during the summer to train. It was a largely white crowd, too, which is to be expected in rural upstate New York. I thought about those marchers and all the others I have seen on television as I sat beside John Brown's grave. And I imagined he would be both disgusted and hopeful, seeing everything going on in America these days. I came away with a renewed commitment to add my voice, my ministry, and my body to the cause, here in Idaho and wherever I can lend support. I'm sure that John Brown's body has long moldered away by now, but his truth that all human beings have inherent worth and dignity is marching on. In this time of great unrest, let us hold in our hearts all those who mourn lives lost and those who have been injured in the struggle. I invite you now to join in our closing hymn, number 108, My Life Flows On in Endless Song.
My life flows on in endless song above earth's light.
Our closing words are from Frederick Douglass. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out what people will submit to, and you will have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress.
Please join me now in reading the words for the extinguishing of our chalice. You'll find it in the order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
One, two, three.